I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Right now, we're in the innovation theme, and what we're considering is how to build a really thriving innovation cycle into your organization so that it will run automatically, it will run on its own without you needing to constantly push it, and it will keep on producing value for your customers, regardless of whatever changes that the world has out there waiting for you. We've seen that you need a cognitive mix of people who are naturally gifted at different parts of the innovation cycle. And sometimes I talk about this in terms of explorers and exploiters, and sometimes I extend that framework to the more detailed mapping of Patrick Lencioni's 6 working geniuses. But regardless of which one we're using, we need a cognitive mix. And we need to enable that cognitive mix in a culture which provides the conditions for people who are different to work together. It provides the expectations, it provides the training, it provides the reward and recognitions, it provides the policies for all of those people to work together. And if you can do that, your innovation will be no problem. You can go and worry about something else. All right, at the end of the last episode, I introduced the idea of research being able to define particular groups of people with particular cognitive styles and describe characteristics that were naturally associated with those people and measurably tended to function better in those groups of people than in others. And a really, really good example of this is people with various neurodivergences. The example that I gave was, let's say, you have a group of people who are diagnosed with ADHD, and you look at their cognitive traits, so you can describe their cognitive traits. And so having that description lets you know the kind of traits that tend to be associated with ADHD. And therefore you can say for people with ADHD traits, they are better or worse at this kind of behavior. I said I was planning to share some more details about this. In future, I'm going to share some more scientific research about these kinds of groups and skills to show how valuable it is for us to take guidance from neurodivergence when we think about putting that culture, the conditions for the success of your cognitive diversity. We think about putting a culture in place. But before I get onto that, and in this episode, what I want to do is to share a lovely, I think it's lovely, case study from a researcher called Laurent Mottron. He published this case study in Nature in 2011. And I'm going to talk through the findings of that and supplement it with some other comments as well. If you want the reference, please just get in touch with me and I'll be happy to give the reference to you. But otherwise, just know that it's being published in a reputable scientific journal. And what Professor Mottron was doing in this paper was to describe his personal experiences of working with autistic team members in his lab. Now, Professor Mottron is a psychiatrist, and he actually studies how autistic people process information, what they can do that is generally better or worse than other people, non-autistic people. But this anecdote that he was publishing in the article was not about autistic people as subjects of scientific research. It's actually about working with autistic people in his lab and how they contribute to what he himself as a non-autistic person can bring to the research and to new knowledge in science. At the time that he wrote this, so 13 years ago, he said that he had worked with 8 autistic people. It's 13 years later, so it's going to be a lot more now. But really, the article focuses on his experiences of working with one autistic woman called Michelle Dawson, and he also brings in some general comments about autistic people too. I love this anecdote because I think it really brings to life the benefits to your innovation outcomes that are available from learning to work with people whose cognitive styles, whose working geniuses, if you like, are different to your own. So while you listen to this anecdote, please think about the kind of innovation cycle that you just want to be running on its own, automatically in your organization, without you having to push it all the time. And think about the conditions for that to be true. So remember, being a member of a cognitively diverse team, and that team operating in a cognitively inclusive culture. All right. So Laurent met Michel by chance when they were interviewed together for a TV documentary about autism. So he's a researcher in autism and using information, and she was then a postal worker who disclosed her autism to her employers and was discriminated against. And she had decided to bring action against her employer for discrimination, and she'd actually learnt everything on her own about the legal system and the rights of employees with disability, and she taught herself everything, and she learnt it so well that eventually she represented herself in a human rights complaint that she brought against that employer for discrimination against disabled people, and she won. Right, that was how effective her self-learning was. That hadn't taken place at the time that they met, but Laurent thought, wow, Michel is great at learning, like, please come and be my research assistant in my lab. So this is now an aside from me. I want to really emphasize that this was a remarkable attitude at that time. So she came to work for him more than 10 years before he wrote this paper in 2011. So it was in the last century, it was in the 1900s. And really, autism only came into the kind of collective awareness of society towards the end of the 1900s. If you think about the film Rain Man, that was one of those big moments where autism awareness really built because of a popular film. Rain Man was released in 1988 only. And although it was really incredible for raising awareness about autism, it at best had the effect of making people think that all autists were savants and could help Tom Cruise to win in Las Vegas casinos. But more generally, it caused people to focus on the problems associated with autism, on the problems that Dustin Hoffman, playing an autistic character, encountered in the normal world with his autism. So thinking about the positive characteristics associated with autism, which is what Laurent Mottron saw, and when he saw how good Michel Dawson was at learning on her own, thinking about the positive characteristics and offering a job based on it really was not typical in society at all. I think it's remarkable to consider what he did there. As evidence of that negative perception, it's an unconscious bias. As evidence of that negative perception, he actually mentions in the paper that even amongst researchers of autism, when they observe brains by imaging and they report differences in volume or differences in how brains are activated when they're performing a particular task, they tend to report them as deficits, not differences. So that's just an example of how the opinions were at the time. That was a general attitude anyway when they started to work together. So when Michel joined Laurent's lab, he asked her to edit some of the scientific papers that he was writing. And he said, and this is a quote, "She gave exceptional feedback, and it was clear that she had read the entire bibliography. The more she read, the more she learned about the field." Think about that. Not only is it thorough and persistent, but she was able to take in an incredible amount of specialized information on her own. What an exceptional skill. She's thorough, detail-oriented, analytical, accurate, and she was able to contribute to the scientific papers of someone who was already experienced and established in the field. And I don't think that's any less a skill because it happens to be displayed by an autistic woman. It's not a skill despite her autism. It is a skill, and she's autistic. So Laurent Mottron goes on in the paper to talk about how Michel applies this kind of very analytical skill to working with data. So this is a research lab, so remember they've got lots and lots of data, no shortage of it at all. And he describes it as a bottom-up approach. He says that the models that she creates as she's working, they all follow from the facts. She builds up her models from the facts. She builds them bottom up. And therefore, she almost never overreaches. He said, I believe that they, autists, I believe that they contribute to science because of their autism, not in spite of it. And you can see from this how it works in his research lab. She's actually learned so much by this data focus, this patient building up of conclusions only from the data, that she now has an honorary doctorate. Amazing. There is a downside, there's always a downside to everything. And the downside is that she needs a lot of data. But, you know, when you have a lot of data, as we tend to have these days, then somebody like her will be able to use it to the absolute fullest extent. So great. Now, Professor Mottron contrasted Michel's style with his own style. And he said that he doesn't need as much data. He has a more top-down style. He'll get some kind of general ideas from fewer data points, and he'll create an approximate model. He knows it's not right, it's approximate, but it's his way of working. And then he will go and find facts and check out facts and use them to either confirm his model or parts of his model, or to refute parts of his model and to iterate on them. So Michel builds up from first principles, Laurent takes a jump, a leap of faith, and then tests and iterates. And really importantly, in the Nature paper, he's not saying that one is better than the other. He's not saying that one is right or one is wrong. He's saying these are our natural styles, and for each of us, they are right. It's how we do our best work. But what he is saying, again quoting, is combining the two types of brains in the same research group is amazingly productive. Combining the two types of brains, that's the key. So let's relate that to our innovation cycle now, all right? Now, Laurent is he's an explorer. He takes jumps. He builds approximate models. He gets the gist of something and then works from there. Michel is definitely not an explorer. She is an exploiter. There's no jumping at all. Everything is evidence-based. Everything is precise and accurate and built upon a solid foundation of facts. I think at this point I want to bring in some other generalizations about autism that Laurent brings into the paper. This is not in particular observations about Michel, but observations from his research elsewhere. But I want to emphasize this kind of behavior that Michel is showing by generalizing. So autists tend to have an intrinsic love of detail, attention to detail. They like structure, they like looking for patterns, they're very good at looking for patterns, and they like detail. And they also have really, really good memories. This is my opinion, also based on what I see with my son, but I think because of the way that things are structured and organized in their memories, that they have a very good memory, and they're much less likely, to misremember facts. His research also shows that autists tend to be better naturally. Better means more successful and faster visually, at any kind of visual challenges. So this is like spotting a pattern, even when you've got distractions going on. Spotting a pattern, great, more successful and faster. Rotating complex 3D models, you know, like sometimes you have those quizzes where you need to say which will be the result if I rotate this model by 180 degrees. Autists absolutely fantastic at doing that, more successful and quicker than anybody else. Completing a visual sequence, more successful and faster than anybody else. The cost is of all of this visual brilliance, the cost is difficulties with language. More of the autistic brain is spent on the visual than on the verbal. And that's the reason. It's just an innate characteristic of the brain. All right. So we're starting to see some behaviors that tend to be associated with autistic people. All right, now, rewind and imagine that I hadn't framed this in terms of autism. Imagine that I just told you, I know a largely untapped pool of talent, which is really at home in data. It's logical, it's analytical, it's an accurate pool of talent. They're fantastic evaluators, and they are thorough, they're tenacious. Perhaps they're not all that great in people-oriented roles, but think how much better you would be at evaluating all of those original creative ideas that are coming through, and how much less time and resource you would waste if you had more of this skill set. You probably wouldn't hesitate. You'd probably say, great, where is that untapped population? I know just a job for them. No, I'm not going to put them in a role where I need them to go and interact with influencers and build networks and all that sort of thing. Don't worry, I'm going to put them in my strategy group or my product group or my tech group, and I'll happily give them the seas of data that we have to wade through, and I'll happily wait for the insights that they can bring from those seas of data that will help my organization to be more successful. But I am talking about it in terms of autism, and it's probably colored your opinion of what I'm saying. Probably you're thinking about it in terms of negatives or skills despite autism. And this is that unconscious bias that Professor Mottron also highlighted in his paper. Right. Don't beat yourself up. It's unconscious bias. We all have unconscious biases against all kinds of things. But do beat yourself up if you don't think about changing your attitude now that you've got this far in listening to this podcast. I want to ask you to try not to think, like actively stop yourself thinking something like, we have to recruit autists because they're all analytical and logical. Please don't think that. If that's what you think as a result of this, I don't think I've done a very good job. I don't want you to think that, because although these traits are enriched in autists, every autistic person is always different. It's not 100% of autistic people who always bring all of these traits. And I think it's also unfair if you target autistic people to try to secure these behaviors. It's also unfair to other people who may not be autistic, but may well be analytical and logical and precise and like working with data, right? This is not a trait that's exclusively autistic. It just happens to be enriched in the autistic population. So instead of thinking we need to recruit autists because they're all analytical and logical, please do think, I need more evaluators. I need to make sure that my organization is attractive to autists as well as everybody else, so I can be sure that I find the best evaluator for this job. And it doesn't matter then in the end whether the best person that you found for your evaluator job has an autism diagnosis. It doesn't matter if they do, whether they choose to disclose that to you or not. It doesn't matter. You will have somebody, you will have the best person for your evaluation job. And you'll also have a happy, engaged employee who's able to work in line with their working genius, their cognitive style, and bring you this wonderful enhanced capacity in evaluation and tenacity. So that kind of thinking is why I really advocate strongly for creating cognitively inclusive cultures as a solution for your innovation challenges. Don't specifically target people with autism or ADHD or dyslexia because they are autistic or have ADHD or are dyslexic. Don't do it because they're neurodivergent and you expect that they will automatically come equipped with a particular skill set. That's not how it works, and it's not fair. But please recognize that some skills are just naturally clustered or enriched in these populations. And if you want to get the people who are best at those skills, you need to make sure that you're not accidentally excluding people in those populations who can't work effectively at your organization because your culture isn't set up to enable them. We need a cognitively inclusive culture. So please do look at the working geniuses and the experiences that you need and describe them in the positions that you have available. And just make sure that everybody, neurodivergent or neurotypical, everybody who can offer what you're asking for is able to apply and will be able to thrive at your organization. That's how you can make sure that you get the best talent into your organization all the way along your innovation cycle. It will be cognitively diverse, and if you have a cognitively inclusive culture, then your innovation, the outputs of your innovation will benefit hugely from the kind of complementary thinking that Professor Mottron described in his paper. Thanks so much for listening.